This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Admiration for your new Rav, Rav Agoin, Rav Meir, Shlita, someone who I have the utmost respect for as a Talmid Chacham, as a Lamdin, and above all, as a tremendous Bal Midos Tovos. I'm in the neighborhood a very short amount of time, and your Rav was mamish makdim shalom to me, ba'oifen nifla. And even though I'm not Roy, but as this time of the year comes, and we're all looking to work on ourselves, to upgrade our Kavod HaBriyos and our Avas Yisrael, I personally look up to Rabbi Glatstein Shlita as a paragon of these ideals, and all of the messages that Rabbi Glatstein Shlita mentioned in his drasha, all I could say is Ru'yim Hadvarim L'Misha Amram. This Beis Medrash has been a premier Makom Torah Tefillah for so many decades under the leadership of Rav Reisman Shlita, and I am very confident, and I offer my Birchas Hedyot, that the Beis Medrash should continue Malin B'Kodesh Ve'ein Moiridin. The Beis Medrash should continue to become and to continue to be Makom Shemegadlim B'Ai Torah Tefillah until the great day Ad V'Ad B'Chlal, that all the Batei Knesiyos, the Batei Midrashos gather to become part of the Beis HaMikdash Sheyibana B'Mher V'Yameinu. Tisha B'Av is the most wretched day on our calendar. It's a miserable day. It's such a terrible day that the Navi Yirmiyahu, who was born on Tisha B'Av, cursed the day of his birth. From time immemorial, Tisha B'Av has been the most tragic day for Klal Yisrael. The Mishnah says at the end of Masechta Tainis, 5 tragedies happened on Tisha B'Av. The Gemara says, Yoim shehuchbalu b'itzaros. In fact, the Rambam says in the Parsha Mishnayos, even when the Beis HaMikdash stood, they still fasted on Tisha B'Av. The Mishnah tells us, Chamisha tzaros, first Beis HaMikdash, second Beis HaMikdash. And throughout history, Tisha B'Av has been like a lightning rod of tragedy for Klal Yisrael. The city of Alexandria, which was even larger than Beitar, was destroyed on Tisha B'Av. The Abarbanel writes in his commentary to Hosea that England was expelled on Tisha B'Av in the year 1295. The Abarbanel says the remez is Kole Goresh Yigoresh. In the year Kole, France was expelled on Tisha B'Av. Of course, we know the Spanish expulsion was on Tisha B'Av. World War I began on Tisha B'Av. I remember when I was a kid. It was the Shabbos before my bar mitzvah. It was a year that Tisha B'Av fell out on Shabbos. So I'm walking to shul on Shabbos, Tisha B'Av. I grew up in Flatbush. We davened in the Aguda of Avenue L. A block away, it was the Shabbos before my bar mitzvah. I look off in the distance. The shul was not there anymore. The shul had burnt down on Tisha B'Av. Rav Isaac Sher writes, why when Titus Harasha plunged his sword into the Paroiches, why did blood come out of the Paroiches? To teach Klal Yisrael that the Beis HaMikdash is the source of life. It's Kihi Beis Chayenu. And when Titus destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, it's as if we suffered cardiac arrest. That's what a miserable day Tisha B'Av is. And yet at the same time, if you look in Megillah Seicha, Perak Aleph, Pasuk Tezvav, Kara Olai Mayed. So you'll say, Mayed just means an appointed time. The Shulchan Aruch writes, Siman Tafkun Kufnun Tasif Daled, Ein Noiflim Apneim B'Tisha B'Av, the Ikri Mayed. In fact, we don't say Tachnun Erev Tisha B'Av, because it's called a Mayed. The Beis Yosef says, Siman Taf Kufnun Tas, he brings from the Tashbates, that in the times of Rabbeinu Yaakov Sagan Leviah, someone passed away on Tisha B'Av, and they did not allow the recitation of Tziduk Hadin because it's a Yom Tif. What kind of Yom Tif is it? What are we celebrating? We're celebrating Churban. We're celebrating disaster. What is the Yom Tif of Tisha B'Av? 1946. It's the first Yom Kippur after the war. They had just finished Kriyas HaTorah in a DP camp called Feldafink, which was a collection and a gathering of many of the broken shells, those who had survived a terrible catastrophe, who were groping to put the shattered pieces of their lives back together again. And they had just finished laning on Yom Kippur, and they received word that General Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces and soon to be the 34th President of the United States, he was coming to pay a visit. And when the general would come, the survivors would have to appoint a representative, someone who could speak on their behalf, someone who could vent the pent-up emotion in their souls. And they said to themselves, the Shomrei Torah mitzvahs in the camps said to themselves, who better to represent us than the Kloisenberger Rebbe? Someone who, even though he lost his 11 children and his wife, he would go from one broken neshama to the next, breathing life into the embers, reinvigorating the spark of Yiddishkeit. He's the only one who could relay our true feelings. Only the Rebbe could represent us. And then the more progressive ones, the enlightened ones, the ones who had forsaken Torah and mitzvahs, they said, him? We've long forgotten about that Yiddishkeit. We don't want to bring that back again. He's an embarrassment to us. We want someone who could speak to the president, a man of today, not a man of the past. Someone we're not embarrassed of. And there was a big argument in the camp. Who should be appointed to represent? And they came to some type of compromise. They said, okay, the Rebbe could speak, but there are 3 conditions. Number 1, he cannot mention the name of God. Number 2, he can't give any musar. And number 3, we're going to have the last word. We need to speak last. And so Eisenhower came and they set up a big platform. And they sat at the table, and the Rebbe goes up to the podium. And as he's going up to the podium, he grabs the talis, and he dons himself with the talis, and he makes the bracha asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu lehisatev batzitzis, and he manages to say the name of Hashem. And then he greets the general, and he says, General, we will forever be thankful to the role that you played in saving the lives of a people completely innocent, hounded, and for that, we will be forever grateful. And then he turns to the people, and he encourages the people. And he says, my dear brothers and sisters, we must never forget that we are the Am Hashem. We must never forget that we have a purpose and a tachlis in this world. And if the Ribbon Shalom selected us, and he saved us, then we have a job to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim wherever we go. And if the Ribbon Shalom saw fit to save our lives, we have to realize we have a tachlis in this world. We have a purpose in this world. And as he's talking, he's pulling on the drawstrings of these broken neshamas. And the people began to cry. And there were many people who said they hadn't cried in 6 years. That the well springs of tears had long ago dried up. And the thousands of people in the crowd who were listening, rivers of tears were flowing through the crowd. And Eisenhower was sitting there, and Eisenhower was shaken to the core. He was visibly and profoundly moved. And all the others who supposedly prepared speeches, they said, Moichel Zayin, there's nothing left to say. And Eisenhower gets up and he goes over to the Kloisenberger Rebbe and he says, Holy Rabbi, tell me, what can I do for you? What can I do for your people? And the Rebbe looks him in the eye, and the Rebbe had piercing eyes. And who knows what the Rebbe is going to ask for. And the Rebbe says, today is Yom Kippur, we only have 4 days until Sukkot. We need Daled Minim, could you get us Daled Minim? And Eisenhower's looking at him like, what planet did this man come from? And on that day, he dispatched a plane to Italy where he retrieved thousands of Daled Minim for the survivors. To give over a message, to give over the message of Klal Yisrael, the feelings of our suffering and the triumph of our continuous survival, we needed someone at least as great as the Kloisenberger Rebbe. To give over to Eisenhower, we needed a Kloisenberger Rebbe. How great do we have to be to give over to our children, to our families, to our mishpacha, to give over in the proper way the agony of Jewish destruction and the glory of our continuous survival? How do we know what to emphasize? How do we know what to stress? How do we know how to articulate it? You need gadlus b'Torah, and that is something I am completely unworthy of. Hineni ha'oni nimas nirash v'nifchad. But to borrow the analogy of the Chafetz Chaim, I stand before you kenanos ha'omer al gabei anak, like a midget that stands on the shoulders of a giant. Because what I would like to share with you this evening are not my thoughts and not my perspectives and not my experiences. It's a great covet for me to share with you the perspectives of literally a giant of spirit, majestic personality, and a great tzaddik, and someone who's very dear and close to me. I want to share with you very briefly some of the experiences of my grandfather, Zal Gesundsein, Rabbi Glatstein, Hashem Yishmareu B'Chayehu Lo'erech Yomim Meshanim. My grandfather has been a Rav in Pittsburgh since 1951. And if you're a Rav, that's a very long time. He's a survivor of all the infamous camps, Dachau, Auschwitz, Radom. And in 1945, when the American and Russian armies were coming, the Germans had to make a very important decision. The Germans could either focus their resources at the war front to try to win the war, or they could dedicate all of their abilities to exterminate whatever Jews were still left in Europe. They chose to exterminate. So they rounded up whatever Jews were left in the camps, my grandfather included, and they packed them like animals onto cattle cars, where they were headed to the Tyrol Mountains to dig their own graves. So I happened to chance upon a book that describes what the conditions were on these cattle cars. But more importantly, this book contained a historical treasure that my family was not aware of. The book is called A Brush with Death. It was written by a Yid, Morris Wisegrad. He was an artist in the camps. He writes, there were more than 100 men stuffed into our car. It was so crowded that no one was able to sit. The doors were shut immediately. It took 3 hours before the train moved. Finally, the train began to move, but then it stopped again at the Gdansky terminal for an hour and a half. After 4.5 hours without air, the heat was unbearable. The Ukrainians guarding us said that they would give us water in exchange for valuables. We gave them valuables, and they took the water and they splashed it in our face. People had to perform functions right in the car. The stench became unbearable. No one around me could even react, says Morris Wisegrad. Death was imminent. At about midnight, there was a rabbi on the car, Rabbi Mordechai Glatstein. Rabbi Glatstein called out, Jews, say vidoy. And then he writes in parentheses, Rabbi Glatstein and his brother survived the war and settled in the United States. How did it happen? With the help of the Almighty, the Americans discovered the plot of the Germans, and under the direction of Brigadier General Henning Linden, the U.S. Air Force bombed the railroad tracks, thwarting the plan of these Rishon. My grandfather said over many times that when the Americans landed and the Germans realized that they were coming, they quickly exchanged uniforms with the uniforms of the inmates. But the Americans were not duped by the scheme because the German soldiers were robust, they were corpulent, they were chazerim. And the Jewish prisoners were skeletons, they were walking cadavers. The American general, Henning Linden, handed my grandfather his pistol. He said, Rabbi, the war is over. Take revenge against the enemy. To which my grandfather responded, revenge? I leave revenge to the Ribbono Shel Olam. It's been 5 years since I had Masechta Baba Basra. Now I'm going to have access to Masechta Baba Basra. That's my freedom. I leave revenge to the Ribbono Shel Olam. My grandfather before the war was a Ben Bayis by Reb Nachum Zemba, Hashem Yimkam Dama, and he was together with him in the same house in the Warsaw Ghetto. After the war, my grandfather was appointed the head of the religious department of the Joint Distribution Committee. Aside from being a rabbi before the war, he also studied English. So he was given a Jeep, he was given an American Army uniform, and he was the liaison between Eisenhower and the survivors. When Eisenhower came to Feldafing, my grandfather was the one who served as Eisenhower's translator to the Kloisenberger Rebbe. When Eisenhower shipped in the Daled Minim, these Daled Minim arrived at my grandfather's desk. And I'm very proud to say that my Zayda was the Shlucha d'Rachmana. He was the agent of the Ribbon Shalom to distribute thousands of Daled Minim on that very first Sukkot for the Jews in Feldafing. And I'm not telling you stories that I heard. I'm very glad to show you, I have a photograph. My grandfather handing out Daled Minim to the survivors in the first Sukkot right after the war. So let me share the following question with you. Tisha B'Av is such a wretched day. It's the culmination of 3 weeks. We don't take a haircut. We have 9 days. We don't bathe. We don't eat meat. You have Shvuah Shechal by Tisha B'Av, where there is Surah Medina de Gemara. You have Erev Tisha B'Av. You have Sudas HaMafsekes. It's Mamish Kemesai Mutal Lefanav. So you would expect Tisha B'Av would be at least Shiva. And you sit on the floor at night, and you sit on the floor a few hours in the morning, and it's all over. You get up in the middle of the day. You don't sit on the floor. The Avela says, come on over. You put on your tefillin. You don't sit. It's not even Shiva. What happened? You're moving up, more intense, more intense, more intense. And as you hit it, you can't even give it a full day. You can't even give. It's like part of Tisha B'Av is getting up. You have to get up on Tisha B'Av. What's the pshat? What's the meaning of the Minhag Yisrael? To get up b'chatzi hayom. I have to read you this account. It's an article my grandfather wrote about his account, vivid, first-hand account of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. These are his words, not a translation. He says, Ani hagever ra ani b'shevet evrasai. I am the man who saw the affliction of my people. I am the victim, and I am the witness. I saw the Warsaw Ghetto with thousands of skeletons extending their bony arms as if begging for mercy and life. I saw the Warsaw Ghetto littered with corpses, their faces distorted, swollen, eyes open wide, skulls crushed, and blood everywhere. Blood of our children, of our brothers, sisters, fathers and mothers. No imagination, no matter how daring, could conceive of anything that we saw. No language has been created to describe the enormity of the Holocaust. Let me share with you a feeling that is miskaber in me every year as Tisha B'Av comes. Let me tell you a story. My grandfather writes, from Radom we were transported to Dachau. Dachau was the Emek Habacha, the valley of weeping of the Germans, Malach HaMaves. Killings every day. By the way, just as an aside, my grandfather said many times, when he was in Auschwitz, he saw Eichmann, he saw the Malach HaMaves himself. And Eichmann invited a special guest to join him in Auschwitz. And who was that? The Mufti from Jerusalem. And Eichmann and the Mufti would sit together, arm in arm, like Chaverim, and they would pass Jews in front of them, and they would beat them in a certain way that there should be no continuity of Klal Yisrael. And that was the entertainment for Eichmann and the Mufti. It's an amazing thing. The Goyen writes in the commentary to Tzafra D'Tzniusa, that if Esav and Yishmael come together, they would be Machriv Kol Ha'olam Kulai. So my grandfather said that was Mekuyim, Mufti, and Eichmann in Auschwitz together. That was Ke'ilu, Chas v'shalom. So my grandfather was in Dachau and he was together with his heilige brother Henoch. And on one occasion they were kicked and chased to the crematoria. My grandfather writes, at the doorstep of the Beis HaSreifa, where there were already tens of thousands burning inside, people on the outside were already convulsing from the heat of the smoke. And his brother turns to him and says, "Mein dear Brüder, I need some water. I'm going to die before I even get in." My grandfather said, "We can't drink water now. It will just cause the pain to be greater inside." And with a foot in the Beis HaSreifa, at the last moment, the SS officer appeared, yanked me and my brother out by our hair. "You could work. Get out of here." This godly wonder will remain in our memories forever. Certainly it was a time of Hester Panim. But just like in the time that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, if you would go inside, you would see the Kruvim embracing each other, which meant that even though we're not makir the Hashgacha Pratis, but at the same time there's a certain Giloi Hashgacha that we never saw before. People want to know, so where was the Ribbono Shel Olam? He was at the threshold of the crematoria, and he yanked my grandfather out. But then a very simple thought occurred to me. That it wasn't only my grandfather who the Ribbono Shel Olam pulled out of the crematoria. Because had the Ribbono Shel Olam not saved him, I would not be here today. I wouldn't be. So the Ribbono Shel Olam saved my Zayda. He saved my father. He saved me. He saved my children. I don't know. I guess he wanted us. And you know something? If you're sitting in this room tonight, then the Ribbono Shel Olam rescued you too. Many, many, many times. You know, people say, if only I would see a Neis Galoi, then I would really have emunah. If I would see a Kriyas Yamsuf, I would daven with such emunah. You want to see a Nes? You look around this room tonight, and you see a face of a Yid in Tafshin Ayin Zayin. This is the greatest Nes that ever existed in the history of the world. If only you knew how many Nisim v'Neflois Ribbono Shel Olam has been performing for 3,300 years, so you could be here tonight. In Mitzrayim, 80% of Klal Yisrael perished. But apparently, your direct ancestor made it through, was from that Echa V'Chamishim, otherwise you wouldn't be here today. The destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash. The death toll was enormous. Churban Bayesheni. Josephus writes that 1.1 million Jews were slaughtered, and then the Romans hunted down every last Yid they could find. Crusades, tens of thousands. 1391, 200,000 Yidden converted in Spain. 1492, tens of thousands were murdered. But your direct ancestors made it through. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. The Ribbono Shel Olam saved us from pogroms, from Holocaust, from crematoria, from gas chamber. Time after time after time. For a Jew to be here tonight, it's not statistically unlikely. It's not highly improbable. It's downright impossible. It's a Nes Galoi of the greatest proportions. How can we not say over from Rabbi Yaakov Emden? Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden in the introduction to the Siddur, V'yeich lo yevoish ha-koifer b'hashgacha v'yamoid nichlam. How can a koifer not be utterly ashamed? Misha yayin b'yichud in yonenu mamadenu ba'olam. Just look at Klal Yisrael today. Achar kol ma she'avar oleinu me'atzoros v'atmuros alofim me'ashanim. After everything that's happened to us, says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Chai nafshi, I swear, says Rabbi Yaakov Emden. He takes a shvuah. Ki b'hizboineni b'neflois eileh. Then when I think about these wonders, Godloi etzli yoiser mikol nisim b'neflois. They're greater to me than all the miracles. She'asa Hashem, b'Mitzrayim, u'v'amidbar, u'v'yeretz Yisrael. You didn't see Kriyas Yamsuf. You saw greater. And if Rabbi Yaakov Emden is astonished by the wonder of a Yid in the 18th century, can we even begin to imagine what Rabbi Yaakov Emden would say if he saw a room full of Yidden today? How would he describe that miracle? There are no words. Maybe he would say it's a nes she'en kol malach uberio yicholim l'sha'er. And think for a moment. If this is the greatest nest in the history of the world, who did the Rebbeinu Shalom make the nest for? Not for Moshe Rabbeinu, and not for Yehoshua ben Nun, not for Rashi, and not for the Rambam, and not for the Vilna Gaon. He made it for me, and he made it for you. I guess he wants us. He doesn't want us. He wants our tefillah. He wants our Torah. He wants our Amen Yehi Shmei Rabbah. He wants our Avas Chinam. The Rebbeinu Shalom saved us from Mitzrayim, from Chumash Bayis Rishon, Chumash Bayis Sheni, because he wanted us to be the ones to cry out, please rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. Can any generation in the history of Klal Yisrael cry out to the Rebbeinu Shalom and say, Ahava Rabba Havtanu Hashem Elokeinu? Look how much you love us, Rebbeinu Shalom. Chemla Gedoyla V'Seira Chamalta Aleinu. And can we be so daring and bold to say, and we often wonder, and the Chavetz Chaim asks, that if they couldn't do it, how are we going to do it? If Moshe Rabbeinu, if David HaMelech, if Tanoim and Amaran, if Rashi and the Rambam and the Vilna Gaon and the Chavetz Chaim, they didn't bring Mashiach. And there are many answers. But we, Aniyeh Aniyim, Yasmi de Yasmi, Ma'anu Mechayenu. We're going to do it? You kidding me? Can we be so bold to say, yeah? Because never has Rebbeinu Shalom had more invested in a Yid in the history of the world than a Yid alive today. How many nisim v'neflois Rebbeinu Shalom had to perform so that we should be here. Why us? We don't know why. But one thing's for sure. He wants us. He wants our Torah. He wants our tefillah. He wants us to be the ones to cry out and to bring Mashiach. And it's our tefillahs and our ma'asim tovim that are the most valuable b'inei Hashem. So Tisha B'Av is a day of tragedy, but it's also a tremendous Yom Tov. Because if Pesach is Zecher L'Yitzias Mitzrayim, and if Shavuos is Zecher L'Matan Torah, can we say that Tisha B'Av is a Zecher to the greatest miracle in the history of the entire world? It's Zecher L'Nitzchias Yisrael. It's Zecher to a Nes that Rabbi Yaakov Emden says is far greater than any miracle that ever was. Allow me to direct your attention to Noach. Noach comes out of the Teva. The whole world is destroyed. The plants, the animals, the birds, and the fish. And what does he do? Vayita karam, he plants a vineyard. And Chazal say that Noach is criticized for planting a vineyard. Haya, loy, lentaya, natia, acheres. He should have planted something else. He should have planted grain. What's wrong with planting a vineyard? He sees the world destroyed. Mankind is decimated. He's an avel. What do you give a downtrodden person to drink? Says a pasuk in Mishlei, Tinu sheichar la'oived v'yayin lamari nafesh. Noach was merely consoling himself. He's comforting himself over the depressed situation of the world. Says Rav Simcha Wasserman, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. Noach comes out of the Teva. He sees the world destroyed. He looks around. Mankind does not exist anymore. Normal human reaction should be, forget it. Throw in the towel. There's no energy. There's nothing left to do. Plant the proverbial vineyard and sip the wine of consolation. But says Reb Simcha, how does a Jew react to tragedy? Chas v'shalom, we don't plant the proverbial vineyard. We cannot allow ourselves to feel sorry for ourselves. We can't throw in the towel, and we can't sip the proverbial wine. There's work to do. There's a world to build. We can't plant a vineyard. We need to build for the future. Noach should have planted grain to build for the future. How do you react to tragedy? You get off the floor. You dust yourself off. You roll up your sleeves and you say, what am I going to do to build for the future of Klal Yisrael? After the Holocaust, my grandfather did not allow himself to feel sorry for himself. He invested every fiber of his being to try to rebuild the lives of the Shevet HaPleita. He said that after the Holocaust, he felt tremendous ruach mimaroim, that the Rebbeinu Shalom was empowering him, investing in him, koyach, to help rebuild the lives of the survivors. In his capacity as the head of the religious department of the Joint, and through his connections to Eisenhower, and through his work as an American officer, he shipped in to Europe Tashmishe Mitzvah, Tashmishe Kedusha, Lulavim, Esroigim, Talesim, Tfilin. There were no Sfarim in the camps. Maizeda published the very first Sfarim after the Holocaust. The Lev David of the Chida, I can show you a picture, and the Even Shlema of the Vilna Gaon. I have letters here from all the Rabbanim of the DP camps. You can't even believe such a thing. Thanking my grandfather. Acharei Omol v'yagia Rabba. After much effort, sweat and toil. Allah biyadoi livnois mikvais. He built a mikvah in each and every DP camp. Moistois HaTorah, yeshivos, chadorim. He could have easily folded up his hands in despair, planted the proverbial vineyard, and sipping the wine of consolation. But that's not how we react. We never stay on the floor. We always get up. We dust ourselves off. We stand on our 2 feet and we say, what are we going to do to rectify the situation? What my grandfather considered his most rewarding task was if he was able to help the survivors find a relative in America or in Canada, so then he could secure for them papers, passports, and help them move either to Eretz Yisrael, to Canada, or to America. Recently we discovered my grandfather helped thousands of families relocate after the war. And I read in an article of the Sida Shavart that one of the great individuals whom my grandfather was able to help to relocate to America was none other than the Kloisenberger Rebbe himself. And this is Tisha B'Av. Yes, we have 3 weeks, we have 9 days, we have Shvuah Shecha by Tisha B'Av. But when the day comes, in the middle of the day, we get off the floor and we stand up and we dust ourselves off and we say to ourselves and we say to each other and we say to Rebbeinu Shalom, enough of the mess already. What are we going to do to help rectify the situation? How are we going to take advantage of all the beautiful messages that the Rav Shlita shared with us? How are we going to build Torah further in America? How are we going to strengthen the yeshivas in America? How are we going to strengthen our children? How are we going to strengthen our families? What are we going to do to ensure that Klal Yisrael is stronger? What can I do? What can my family do? What could my community do? What could we all do together? So in middle of the day, in middle of the bitter Avelos, we stand up, we get off the floor. We don't allow ourselves to wallow in self-pity. So we should talk about Zoicha, and the schus of coming together tonight, the schus of hearing such beautiful words from the Rav Shlita, should all have siyata d'shmaya. And the schus of being Mesabel, al Yushalayim Karoi, and trying to be Mesakein as much as we're able to, the Rebbeinu Shalom should give us all siyata d'shmaya to come together, to be Mesakein whatever we can, to rectify whatever we can. We should have to be zoicha to the coming of the Gula Shlema, B'vias Gal Tzedek, and Her V'Yameinu. Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.